My name is Marcus Vance. In the world of high-end automotive investment, I am not the flashy salesman who stands on the showroom floor wearing an expensive watch and talking about horsepower. I am an automotive engineer and an international asset customs specialist. For 7 years, I built Vance Exotic Imports from a small garage into the premier boutique dealership for ultra-rare, multi-million-dollar hypercars in the country. I handled the complex international homologation laws, environmental certifications, and a strict Department of Transportation, DOT, compliance frameworks that allow track-only weapons to legally drive on public streets. But where there is high-margin asset growth, there is always a parasite waiting to steal the keys. My business partner was Dominic Vance, my paternal cousin. Dominic was a master of corporate theater. He was loud, charismatic, and obsessed with the lifestyle of a luxury car mogul. While I spent weeks in grease-stained coveralls calibrating emissions matrices or reviewing 100-page maritime shipping manifests, Dominic took pictures with celebrities next to the cars I imported, building his personal brand as the king of exotic steel. I let it slide because his connections brought in high-net-worth clients, and I preferred the quiet precision of the engineering bay. But my tolerance ended when I secured the Syndicate contract. After 18 months of intense negotiations with a boutique Italian manufacturer, I secured the exclusive import and distribution rights for the Aero XSV, an ultra-limited carbon fiber hypercar worth $5.4 million apiece. Only 10 units were being produced globally for 2026, and our dealership had locked down the allocation for 5 of them. The projected net profit from a Syndicate flip was a staggering $4.8 million, plus a permanent master dealer status that would elevate our firm to a global entity. I finalized the import infrastructure, cleared the logistical sea freight routes, and locked the entire compliance architecture into our secure company portal. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week before the first 2 Aero X hypercars were scheduled to land at the port of Newark, I walked into the dealership. My security key card didn't chime. The digital lock flashed a cold, solid red. Moments later, the heavy glass doors opened, and Dominic stepped out, flanked by 2 corporate lawyers and a private security guard. "Marcus, don't bother trying the scanner," Dominic said, a smug, arrogant grin plastered across his face. The corporate structure of Vance Exotic Imports has been streamlined. As of yesterday's board meeting, your operating shares have been legally dissolved under the Emergency Capitalization Clause. You've been bought out at a base book value of $50,000. Your engineering services are no longer required. I looked at the lawyers, then back at Dominic. You signed a personal guarantee on the Aero X allocation, Dominic. You don't have the engineering credentials to clear those cars through federal customs. I don't need your credentials anymore, Marcus. Dominic laughed, adjusting his expensive designer sunglasses. I have the Italian manufacturer contracts, I have the shipping manifests, and I have the buyer's deposits already sitting in our corporate account. You're just a mechanic who got lucky with a spreadsheet. I'm the face of this syndicate now. Your guard will escort you off the property. They had used a hidden loophole in our early corporate bylaws to dilute my shares while I was traveling, locked me out of the servers, and stolen a $25 million import deal that I had engineered from scratch. You always did care more about the paint job than the engine, Dominic, I said, completely calm, stepping back from the guard. But you forgot that in international trade, a car isn't an asset until the government says it can roll on the asphalt. I walked away without making a scene. What Dominic and his high-priced corporate lawyers had completely failed to realize was that the Aero XSV was not a standard import. Because of its experimental twin-turbo engine layout, the vehicle could only be legally imported under a highly specific, newly updated 2026 Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Independent Commercial Importer, ICI, exemption. In his desperate rush to copy my logistics files and lock me out of the system, Dominic downloaded the shipping manifests, but he completely missed the underlying regulatory lock. The EPA exemption certificate wasn't tied to the company name. It was legally issued directly to my personal master automotive engineering license. Without my active signature and verified physical inspection token at the port of entry, those cars weren't luxury hypercars. Legally, the moment they touched American soil, they would be classified as contraband, unauthorized, non-compliant hazardous material. And the federal customs trap was about to spring shut on the entire syndicate. Dominic Vance's ego reached its absolute zenith over the next 7 days. Instead of managing the intricate, micro-detailed technical handoffs required at the maritime terminal, he spent over $80,000 of the company's remaining liquid operational capital to rent a massive, high-profile media pavilion right outside the secure perimeter of the Port of Newark. He invited top-tier luxury automotive influencers, wealthy venture capitalists, and the 3 high-net-worth buyers who had already wired 7-figure deposits to secure their allocations of the Aero XSV. The atmosphere at the pavilion was a circus of unearned corporate vanity. Heavy bass echoed from giant speaker arrays, crystal champagne flutes glinted under intense studio lighting, and a massive digital countdown clock projected onto a premium carbon fiber background tracked the exact minutes until the transport trucks would arrive with the first 2 hypercars. Dominic stood in the center of the media scrum, wearing a custom-tailored Italian silk suit, holding court with automotive journalists, and loudly declaring himself the visionary disruptor who had shattered the traditional constraints of international luxury car distribution. "We don't just import cars, gentlemen," Dominic boasted into a reporter's microphone, gesturing grandly toward the shipping yards. "We architect lifestyles." Vance Exotic Imports has broken the monopoly on European hypercar distribution. The Aero XSV represents the absolute pinnacle of untamed mechanical performance, and my legal team has built an ironclad, frictionless pipeline to deliver these track weapons directly to American asphalt. The old ways of relying on backroom engineers and tedious compliance mechanics are officially dead. Today, we open the floodgates. I was sitting less than 2 miles away in a parked mobile diagnostic van, surrounded by high-resolution multi-frequency scanners, digital customs ledger links, and 3 auxiliary monitors tracking the real-time maritime manifest of the container ship Atlantic Titan. I was completely out of sight, wearing my standard industrial work jacket, watching the live stream of Dominic's party on my tablet, while my main monitors tracked the precise automated data handshakes of the port's computer infrastructure. At exactly 2:15 p.m., the Atlantic Titan finished its docking sequence at berth 24. 10 minutes later, the 2 specialized, climate-controlled steel shipping containers holding the multi-million-dollar Aero XSV units were lifted by a massive gantry crane and placed flat onto the concrete inspection pad of the Port of Newark's secure customs sector. On Dominic's live stream, the countdown clock hit absolute zero. And there they are, ladies and gentlemen. Dominic shouted into his wireless microphone, pointing toward the main security gate where the transport trucks were supposed to emerge. The first 2 Aero X hypercars in the Western Hemisphere are rolling through the gates right now. But the gates didn't open. Instead, a sudden, heavy silence fell over the shipping terminal. On my auxiliary monitors, the digital customs ledger for both vehicle identification numbers, VINs, flashed a sharp, neon purple code. Hold, regulatory noncompliance, DOT/EPA injunction. Within 60 seconds, the livestream camera captured a convoy of 3 dark, unmarked government SUVs rolling into the media pavilion area, their low-frequency blue and red strobe lights reflecting off the polished glass structures. For heavily armed officers from the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, flanked by 2 senior inspectors from the Environmental Protection Agency's, EPA, Criminal Investigation Division, stepped out of the vehicles. They didn't walk toward the cars. They walked directly up the steps of the stage, pushing past the influencers and grabbing the microphone straight out of Dominic's hand. "This public assembly is officially restricted," the lead EPA inspector announced, his voice amplified across the entire pavilion speakers. "We are executing an immediate federal asset seizure and administrative lockdown order. All transport manifests associated with Vance Exotic Imports corporate tax ID have been flagged for illegal importation of non-compliant hazardous materials." Dominic's face instantly drained of all color, the smug, arrogant grin evaporating into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He stepped forward, his hands trembling as he tried to adjust his designer tie. Wait, hold on. There's a massive mistake here. I am Dominic Vance, the CEO of this syndicate. We have the factory certificates. We have the maritime bills of lading. Everything is fully authorized by the Italian manufacturer. The manufacturer doesn't grant legal authority to bypass United States environmental and safety laws, Mr. Vance. The inspector replied coldly, pulling a heavy, certified 3-page federal injunction from his leather portfolio and slapping it directly against Dominic's chest. Under the 2026 Clean Air Act amendments, experimental twin-turbo high-emissions engines cannot enter commerce under a standard corporate importer profile. They require a verified, active master automotive engineering license holder to execute a personal physical inspection token at the port of entry. Dominic stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, humiliating whisper as his wealthy investors and the automotive journalists began backing away from him, capturing every second of his public ruin on their smartphones. We have that. Our company files contain the master engineering blueprint. We have the exemption file. The exemption file you copied from your former partner's database is an unsigned draft, Mr. Vance, the inspector stated, his voice echoing with absolute authority. The actual legal exemption certificate is issued directly to the personal engineering license of Marcus Vance. Because he is not listed as an active officer or physical inspector on your corporate customs filing, these vehicles have been imported without valid federal clearance. Legally, they are classified as non-compliant contraband. The Department of Homeland Security is seizing both hypercars immediately, and your firm is facing an active $2.5 million civil smuggling penalty for attempting to clear unauthorized hazardous material into the United States. As the U.S. Marshals began wrapping bright yellow federal seizure tape around Dominic's expensive media banners and locking down the transport trucks, Dominic stood in the center of the ruined pavilion, clutching the heavy legal document, his eyes wide with frantic, terrified realization. The master salesman had stolen a multi-million-dollar asset, but he had completely failed to realize that without the engineer's living signature, his multi-million-dollar dream was nothing more than a highly illegal, radioactive piece of scrap metal. By 8 a.m. the following morning, the sleek, minimalist headquarters of Vance Exotic Imports was under a physical and digital siege. The glittering glass showroom, usually filled with pristine classic Ferraris and low-slung Lamborghinis, felt like a war room in the middle of a total collapse. The phone lines were completely jammed with furious calls from corporate defense attorneys, public relations managers, and the personal assistants of some of the most powerful billionaires in the country. Dominic's brilliant marketing campaign had backfired spectacularly. Because he had invited the media to the port, the video of federal agents wrapping his multi-million-dollar launch event in yellow crime scene tape was the #1 trending topic on global automotive forums. Dominic sat in the executive office, his custom silk suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands shaking as he stared at a stack of immediate asset withdrawal demands. The 3 high-net-worth buyers who had wired 7-figure deposits for the Aero XSV weren't just demanding refunds. Their legal teams had already filed a joint emergency freeze on Vance Exotic Imports' primary liquid escrow accounts, alleging corporate fraud and material misrepresentation. Worse than the investors, however, was the secure video link flashing on the master boardroom screen. It was an emergency broadcast from Maranello, Italy. Giovanni Rossi, the ruthless chief operating officer of the Aero X manufacturing syndicate, was looking through the camera with an expression of absolute, icy fury. Dominic, you have dragged our brand's name through a public smuggling scandal before the first chassis even cleared the port. Rossi's voice boomed through the high-end conference speakers, cold and unyielding. The Aero XSV is an elite engineering marvel, not a tool for amateur corporate theater. Our legal department has just reviewed the customs injunction from the United States EPA. You guaranteed us that your firm held complete, unconditional regulatory clearance for our experimental twin-turbo powertrains. You lied to us. Mr. Rossi, please, it's a temporary administrative misunderstanding. Dominic stammered, leaning toward the camera, his voice cracking with desperation. My legal team is drafting an appeal right now. We just need a minor variance from the Port Authority. Silence. Rossi snapped, cutting him off instantly. There are no variances for international sanctions and environmental fraud under the 2026 Maritime Code. Our contract is explicit. Section 9, paragraph 4 states that any regulatory seizure of our vehicles due to importer negligence constitutes an immediate, material breach of contract. If those two hypercars are not legally cleared from that federal impound lot within 48 hours, the AeroX Syndicate will officially terminate your exclusive distribution rights. We will confiscate your remaining 3 allocations, keep your $5 million manufacturing deposit as a structural penalty, and sue your firm for global brand damages. You will be utterly ruined. The video feed went completely black. Dominic slumped back into his leather chair, breathing heavily, looking at the older board members who sat around the mahogany table in stunned, terrified silence. These were the same institutional investors who had voted with Dominic weeks ago to dilute my shares and lock me out of the company. Now, they were looking at a combined financial liability of over $7.5 million in immediate penalties, lawsuits, and asset forfeitures. The entire corporate entity was hours away from total liquidation. We can't appeal the EPA ruling, the firm's chief compliance attorney said, throwing a heavy folder onto the table. I've spent the last 6 hours reviewing the Federal Customs Registry. The 2026 Independent Commercial Importer Exemption Token is hard-coded into the Department of Transportation's Automated Verification Network. It requires a biometrically verified cryptographic signature linked to a master automotive engineering license with a clean 10-year federal compliance record. Dominic, you don't have that license. None of our high-priced corporate lawyers have that license. There's only one person in the entire North American continent who can unlock those shipping containers. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The board members turned their heads, one by one, looking directly at Dominic. Call him, the senior board member ordered, his voice trembling with anger. Call Marcus right now. No, I'm the CEO of this company. Dominic shouted, slamming his fist onto the table, trying to maintain his fragile grip on power. We can hire another engineer. We can buy a license from a third-party customs broker. There are no third-party brokers certified for the AeroX powertrain. You idiot! The board member roared back, standing up and towering over Dominic. The factory data streams are locked to Marcus's personal engineering profile. If he doesn't sign that customs release by tomorrow afternoon, the bank forecloses on this showroom, the Italian factory takes our deposits, and every single one of us faces a federal indictment for illegal importation. You stripped him of his shares because you thought he was just a mechanic. Well, right now, that mechanic holds the survival of this entire multi-million-dollar corporation in his hands. Call him, or I will personally file a derivative lawsuit against you for gross fiduciary recklessness before noon. Dominic looked around the room, finding absolutely no allies left among the corporate predators he had tried to impress. His arrogance was completely shattered. With a trembling hand, he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed my private number. I let it ring for exactly 5 cycles before I picked up, sitting comfortably in my quiet diagnostic lab, watching the digital asset metrics stabilize on my master screens. I didn't say a word. I simply waited for the sound of his total defeat. Marcus, please don't hang up. Dominic's voice crackled through the phone line, completely stripped of the theatrical, confident baritone he used for the media. He sounded broken, like an amateur mechanic who had just dropped a heavy wrench into a running engine. We have a critical situation at the port. The EPA has issued an administrative freeze on the AeroX containers. The Italian factory is threatening a total breach of contract lawsuit, and the board is panic selling. We need your master engineering signature on the customs release token before the close of business tomorrow. We're willing to pay you an immediate consulting fee of $50,000 to clear the assets. I'll let the silence hang over the line for 5 agonizing seconds, listening to the heavy, anxious breathing of the entire boardroom, listening through the speakerphone. $50,000, Dominic? I asked, a cold, quiet chuckle escaping my lips. That's the exact amount you tried to buy me out with when you changed the locks on my showroom. You thought you were buying out a simple mechanic. But a mechanic only knows how to fix what's broken. An engineer designs the system so it can't be stolen. Marcus, please, let's be reasonable. Dominic pleaded, his voice rising in panic. The firm is facing a $2.5 million smuggling penalty. If those cars aren't cleared, Vance Exotic Imports goes into total liquidation. We'll lose everything. Correction, Dominic. You will lose everything, I replied flatly, shifting the digital customs ledger onto my main monitor. I've already established my own independent entity, Vance Advanced Logistics. I don't need your showroom, but you desperately need my master automotive engineering license to avoid a federal indictment. If you want my signature on that digital token, you will agree to my terms, and they are completely non-negotiable. Name them. The voice of the senior board member interrupted, pushing Dominic away from the speakerphone. We have a corporate secretary ready to draft the emergency resolution. First, I stated, my tone sharp and authoritative. Dominic Vance will execute an immediate, unconditional forfeiture of his entire equity stake in Vance Exotic Imports for gross fiduciary recklessness and material misrepresentation. He will step down as CEO effective immediately, and his name will be permanently scrubbed from the corporate registry. I could hear Dominic gasp in the background, attempting to protest, but the senior board member instantly silenced him. Agreed. What else, Marcus? Second, the board will issue a preferred equity restructuring, transferring 65% of all active and voting shares of the company directly to my new entity, Vance Advanced Logistics. I am taking total, absolute operational control of the dealership and the import pipeline. Third, the $4.8 million net profit from the AeroX SV Syndicate flip will be routed directly into my division's capital reserve account as a performance architecture bonus. You have exactly 30 minutes to send the legally binding digital sign-off tokens to my secure terminal. If the clock hits 9 a.m. without my confirmation, I will delete my personal exemption profile from the DOT database. And you can explain to your billionaire buyers why their hypercars are being crushed by the federal government. We'll sign it, the board member said without a single second of hesitation. The documents will clear within 15 minutes. At exactly 9:12 a.m., my monitors chimed. The cryptographic handshakes completed across the network, legally dissolving Dominic's corporate existence and transferring absolute ownership of the entire multi-million-dollar import syndicate into my hands. An hour later, I pulled up to the secure inspection pad at the Port of Newark in my dark utility truck. The two steel shipping containers containing the AeroX SV units sat under the heavy, armed guard of U.S. Customs and Homeland Security officers. Dominic was standing outside the perimeter fence, his tailored suit completely ruined by the salt spray of the harbor, watching in utter humiliation as the federal inspectors stepped back to give me access. I pulled out my rugged field tablet, connected it directly to the port's secure mainframe via an encrypted satellite link, and scanned my biometric security token. The system took 2 seconds to verify my master engineering license credentials. With a swift tap on the screen, the neon purple injunction code dissolved, replaced by a bright, flashing green matrix. Release authorized, full compliance cleared. The heavy steel locks on the containers clanked open. The federal officers stepped forward, shaking my hand and nodding in respect as the first carbon fiber AeroX SV rolled out onto the concrete pad, its experimental engine idling with a deep, thunderous roar. I climbed into the driver's seat of the multi-million-dollar machine, adjusting the mirror to look back at Dominic, who was being physically forced behind the security barrier by the terminal guards. The face of the syndicate was gone. The architect of the system was finally behind the wheel. A year has passed since the structural takeover of Vance Exotic Imports, now officially rebranded as Vance Advanced Logistics and Automotive. The change wasn't merely cosmetic. It was a total systemic overhaul. Under my direct control, the remaining 3 units of the AeroX SV allocation cleared the Port of Newark with flawless precision, completely bypassing the administrative delays that plague amateur importers. The The Syndicate flip was executed flawlessly, netting our capital reserve account the projected $4.8 million performance bonus. Today, our showroom isn't a theater for social media influencers or flashy parties. It is a highly insulated, high-security fortress of automotive investment, running on the precise engineering and customs code I spent a decade perfecting. Dominic Vance's reality has been permanently liquidated. Stripped of his equity, his title, and his corporate network, he is currently working as a low-tier sales representative for a used car lot in upstate New York. The expensive designer sunglasses and tailored silk suits were sold to cover his portion of the initial legal fees, and his name remains an active warning inside international trade journals, a textbook example of what happens when unearned arrogance tries to bypass federal compliance laws. My board of directors and our high-net-worth clients no longer look at me as just a mechanic who works in the background. They understand that a multi-million-dollar empire is only as strong as the diagnostic calculations and regulatory blueprints beneath it. You can attempt to change the locks, you can attempt to duplicate the files, but you can never fake the intelligence required to navigate a high-stakes international asset field. The engines are calibrated, the customs tokens are locked down, and the capital is completely secure. Thank you so much to every elite operator in our storytelling community for tracking these asset trails, analyzing the forensic compliance structures, and supporting this channel through another high-stakes corporate execution. If this tactical retaliation report reminded you that calculating every variable will always defeat unearned vanity and cheap business backstabbing, please smash the like button right now. Drop your analytical feedback in the comments below, hit that notification bell, and subscribe to the channel. Stay precise, keep your capital insulated, and I will see you in the next operational update. Take care.